Okay, the new bottom position will be a little bit higher now.
Okay. You need to go up still more?
Yeah.
You still see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
See it.
A little more.
A little higher than I am right now?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah.
Huge generators and giant camera cranes have been driven across mountain and plain from the great state of Michigan. Men of skill and creativity have come from Hollywood and New York. The grounds of a great mansion have been rented for the occasion, and all gather on the Pacific Peninsula of Monterey to photograph the motor car. Here is the centerpiece of Henry Ford's America.
That's good. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Some 2 million Americans have died in it. Although comparative figures are not readily available, it's estimated that about the same number have been conceived in it. It is therefore fair to say that it brings out the best and the worst in man. It has certainly inspired poets and driven movie makers to wretched excess. And this particular motor car is a simple Ford product. At nearby Universal Studios, they are building a car for the devil.
George, you're going to make this kind of a real dark gunmetal gray, or
it's going to look like steel. The whole car is supposed to look like big panels of steel, heavy steel, to give you that frightening look.
Did she tell you much about the story on this, what it's supposed to be doing? It's quite interesting. I mean, the car is actually just born out in the desert. No one knows where it comes from.
What's its purpose? Just to ram people, or just doing destruction, or what? Is it a good car?
It seems to only kill the good people, so it must be a bad car.
Bad car, devil car.
I guess it kills probably a total of 7 or 8 people throughout the picture. But they finally find out really not what motivates it, just how they can kill it, and they bury it.
The motor cars of Detroit, Michigan, however, are not that easy to get rid of. The age of the automobile has been dated from 1926, when it was first reported that Americans had more cars than bathtubs. But then you can't go to town in a bathtub. Is it any wonder that the captains and the kings of Detroit have assumed mythic dimensions? Because of them, it is argued that the city of Detroit has had as great an influence on 20th century man as did Rome in the time of Caesar and Athens in the age of Pericles. And they have done it all with a most imperfect machine that they're still trying to get to work properly. Despite the imperfections of its product, the car companies of Detroit do not consider it a good year until they've managed to sell about 10 million cars.
I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you attending the 68th annual meeting of General Motors stockholders.
This is the world headquarters of the General Motors Corporation. It is the biggest company in the world. Today they're having their annual meeting. And as usual, some of the shareholders are not happy with the way things are going.
I want to be sure we make this point. Thomas A. Murphy, chairman of General Motors, earned $574,976 in salary and bonuses last year, more than double his 1974 total of $272,500, which I think you didn't take your bonus. You can explain that. He's also on the election of directors. Now you listen to him, you listen to me on this. It's about you. It's about you, and you let me finish, and then you have the floor.
Well, look,
I'm talking about your salary, and I suggest
I understand, Mrs. Sauce, it's not going to contribute to anything.
You're working for us. Now, Mr. Chairman, what have you got to say I am not satisfied with your performance.
Thank you.
But most of the shareholders appreciate their chairman, and this makes him a very rich and a very happy man.
America, what do you love best?
Baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet.
What was that again?
We love baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet.
Oh.
Baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet.
That's baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet, huh?
Baseball and hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet.
Makes sense to me.
We love baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet.
I love them.
This man does not like baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, or Chevrolet. He is Henry Ford II, and his motor car company is only the second biggest in the world. But he still believes in the American way, and when Henry Ford talks about America, he does not restrict himself to the United States. Canada is just across the river, and Ford has been selling cars there since 1904.
I've been through our plants up in Canada, and they look just like our American plants to me. I don't see very much difference. We all come generally from the same kinds of places and live in the same kinds of environments. I know the Canadians would want to think they're different from us down here, but I really don't think they're that much different.
On the 12th floor of the world headquarters, he has a president and 45 assorted vice presidents. He also has, according to the New York Times, one of the highest executive mortality rates in all of industry. It is not easy to reach the 12th floor, and the stay can be depressingly short. There is a file on each of 1,000 executives. On each man's file, it is said, there are the names of 3 men who could replace him. Each executive is color-coded. They can be green, blue, yellow, or red. A red will soon be out of work. A green is a man with a future. Will Scott, vice president in charge of dealing with politicians, acts like a green. At any rate, he seems to be having a good time.
The object of this game, you see, is to get rid of the paper. The guy, what's that card game where you keep passing around and you try to get rid of the queen of hearts or something? Is that hearts?
Hearts.
If you get stuck with the queen, you're a loser.
That's right.
That's the way it is around here. You got to get rid of the paper. You got to pass it on to someone else. And if you can get rid of more than you take in that day, you feel pretty good about it. Particularly if it all came from Washington.
Will Scott's future is in the hands of the president himself.
Hey, Walter.
Lee A. Iacocca says he likes men with fire in their belly. This is not the PTA, says Iacocca. It is a combat zone, and he is not interested in survivors, but in conquerors. He's made the Mustang. He's made the covers of Time and Newsweek, but he's still trying to catch up to General Motors.
What is GM and what is Ford and what is Chrysler? What makes them all different?
General Motors operates much more by a committee type of system where there's all sorts of professional inputs, and therefore General Motors does not always come up with things quite quickly. Ford Motor Company, on the other hand, has been able to come up with such a thing as a Mustang, for example, which probably would have, who knows, it might have died in some General Motors committee.
Arvid Jopi, an independent financial analyst and expert on Detroit.
So Ford can move quickly.
It's fiercely competitive. We don't talk to each other much, and we try to husband whatever secrets we have. When you come out with a new car, it's action and reaction time. If you're good, if you're fast on your feet, you react in a year. If you're average, you react in 2, and if you want to go bankrupt, you react in 3. Because of the lead time, it's tough to react. It depends what you're reacting to. Anything less than 12 months, you're just dead in the water. If you miss the market, and if a Mustang's hot, the competition took 3 years to react, and they got murdered.
The Ford Motor Company has another distinction. There's no Mr. General Motors. There's not even a Mr. Chrysler anymore, but there is a Mr. Ford. His occasional fondness for strong drink and his difficulties with wives and traffic cops has created some confusion in the minds of the layman as to whether or not he actually goes to work. There is no such confusion in the House of Ford. He is the last of the great dynastic chiefs. Each man is here at his pleasure, invited to come and advise him in the monastic secrecy of the Design Center.
That page I'm looking at, which is say
Substantially
April
nothing.
28, nothing except names, words.
Only words, yes, sir. We
This
changed
word.
modified B to new standard.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
In the world outside, they're about to launch the cars for 1977. In this room, they make final plans for the cars of 1980. And nobody's allowed to hear what they're saying.
I don't think quite that way.
No,
That
I
may be
haven't.
new to you.
I just wonder whether you're going with not a big, I don't know.
Once upon a time, such meetings were unnecessary. Old Henry I offered a single model, and if you wanted any color but black, you had to paint it yourself. When Henry II was born in 1917, his grandfather had just finished trying to stop the First World War. It was the only thing he'd tried that hadn't worked. A man of straight and simple habit, he had left the employ of Thomas Edison to develop a simple motor car which he called the Model T. He introduced the moving assembly line, which cut the cost dramatically, and the toy of the European rich became the birthright of the American masses. It was cheap, durable, and easy to fix, precisely right for a restless migrant population trying to fill up a huge undeveloped continent. Henry Ford had made America free to move, and like most of the rest of the world, his grandson adored him.
We were allowed to do anything we wanted to do, you know. We were very spoiled in the sense that, you know, we could go in the cashier's cage and fiddle around with the money. We couldn't take any out, but we could fiddle around with it, the pay money.
Little Henry was only 2 when his grandfather held him up to light a furnace and set the mighty Rouge plant into motion. It is recorded that little Henry clapped his hands and shouted. And well he might, for he had just started up the largest single industrial facility in all the world. There was also the makings of a dynasty. Already there was the grandfather, Henry I, a son, Edsel I, and a grandson who would one day be Henry II. By 1927, Americans had bought 15 million Model Ts, and suddenly they stopped. Alfred Sloan of General Motors knew something that Henry Ford did not. Americans no longer wanted a little black box that ran forever. They wanted to travel in style. They wanted chrome, color, comfort, and power. They wanted lots and lots to choose from, and they only wanted it to run until they could afford something better. By the time Henry Ford caught on, both General Motors and Chrysler had gone right by him. Henry Ford took pride in being a simple country boy. But even before his company began to disintegrate, the man himself was beginning to show a dark side. His distrust of bankers and bookkeepers had been perverted into a morbid anti-Semitism. He had become a twisted bigot and a publisher of racist hate literature. He had also developed an obsessive hatred of organized labor. Once he had been hailed as the emancipator of the working man. He had introduced the guaranteed wage, and the mighty Rouge plant was considered a thing of industrial beauty. Now Henry Ford transformed it into a malignant prison. The Great Depression had descended on America, and the frightened working man was turning more and more to the trade union movement. Henry Ford decided that organized labor would be crushed. The 90,000 men inside the Rouge plant were soon working in a state of perpetual terror. At lunch breaks, men would discuss baseball in loud voices for fear they might be suspected of plotting. Their ranks were infiltrated by 9,000 company stool pigeons, and you could no longer trust a man you'd worked beside for years. A brutal army of 800 goons was standing by. If a man was suspected of Union talk, he was beaten to a pulp and then fired for starting a fight. Henry's son Edsel tried to divert the old man from his implacable course of tyranny. A gentle and compassionate man, Edsel was the sole voice of reason in an otherwise ruthless hierarchy. When Walter Reuther and the United Auto Workers came to hand out pamphlets, they were interrupted by representatives of Mr. Ford's security staff. Even the presence of photographers did not divert the goon squad from its allotted task. The breaking of heads and the kicking in of groins was all in the day's work. $50,000 desperate workers finally rose up and struck the Rouge plant. Young Henry II, then busy flunking out of Yale University, wasn't too much concerned.
I did try to get through the picket lines, and I was caught and hauled away by one of the plant superintendents. And then I thought it'd be nice to come up in a speedboat under the bridges, and they said, well, that was out because they'd be throwing bottles and rocks and everything else at you from the bridges on the Rouge River, so I was never able to get through the picket lines. But I thought it'd be kind of fun, you know. I was young and I didn't give a damn.
It was all too much, however, for his father Edsel. Edsel's brave but futile struggle against old Henry's forces of oppression finally broke him. Old Henry refused to believe his son was ill, but Edsel's ulcers had turned cancerous, and in a final tragic irony, he died of infection from his father's unpasteurized milk. Now there was no one to stand between Henry Ford and a colorful brute named Harry Bennett. Bennett had fashioned Ford's kingdom of fear with his own bare hands. Bennett was an expert in the application of naked terror. He had neither the time nor the inclination for the finer points of business, and even in the booming economy of the Second World War, he had helped to bring the Ford Motor Company to the edge of bankruptcy. Mr. Ford was oblivious to Mr. Bennett's shortcomings, but there was a gathering desperation within the family. Finally, old Henry's wife, Clara, who had become disgusted with all the violence and treachery, forced her husband to relinquish what was left of the company to their grandson. It was assumed that Harry Bennett, who carried a pistol and kept lions and tigers for pets, would eat young Henry for lunch. But Henry astounded Mr. Bennett and all of American industry. Within 5 minutes of taking office, he had kicked Harry Bennett out. The day that you took over the company and got rid of Mr. Bennett, and everybody says, how could this 27-year-old kid do this? Was it a nerve-wracking experience for you?
Yeah, pretty. But I was, 27, as you say, and I wasn't really frightened of anything, or nor did I have any feeling that I couldn't do what I wanted to set about to do.
He had to save a company that was losing $10 million a month. He began by firing about 1,000 of Bennett's cronies. The most difficult to dislodge was an executive who carried on a perpetual office party behind locked doors. According to legend, Henry Ford smashed it down with a crowbar.
Yeah, well, I didn't smash it down with a crowbar. We just wanted to open it, and it was locked, so we opened it with a crowbar. It was a steel door. Well, that was at the time. That was at the time when I just took over, and when I had my conversation with Bennett, I just wanted to find out where all the rat holes were. So I figured the best way to do is go out and get at them and have a look at them and see what we're going to do about them.
About all he had going for him was good timing.
At the conclusion of the war, You know, it was a seller's market. We could sell anything we made. If we could produce anything, we could sell it. Even if it was lousy, we could sell it.
But when the boom subsided and the going got tough again, Henry Ford was ready. Under his leadership, the Ford Motor Company was reborn. He did it by recruiting a brand new team of brilliant young executives. But then he dropped a bombshell on them. He called a press conference to unveil a new president. But it wasn't one of his boys. He had raided General Motors and come away with Bunky Knudsen, a former president of Chevrolet. The choice of an outsider shook the foundations of the House of Ford.
There was obviously a line of succession developing, strong support for Lee Iacocca, who had been a brilliant sales and marketing person. And finally, some kind of a contest developed there, which those of us on the outside will never know the specific details.
Henry Ford was soon faced with the possibility of a palace revolution. In his highly volatile corridors of power, an unprecedented struggle for supremacy was joined. For Lee Iacocca and his supporters, it was a fight to the finish. As long as Bunky Knudsen sat on the right hand of Henry Ford, there would be no room for them. After 20 months of turmoil, Bunky Knudsen was gone and Iacocca was in. Could you describe the circumstances and your feelings when Mr. Ford asked you to be president of the company?
I was happy.
The ultimate heir to the throne, however, is meeting old employees at an office party. Henry Ford has 450,000 employees, but only one son. And it is intended that Edsel II will perpetuate the dynasty.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you very much. I got fired from 1921 to 1943. I got fired 3 times, right out. Hadn't been for your old granddaddy, I'd never got back.
Well, I'm glad he let you come back. That's great.
He was a great humanitarian.
I know everybody's dying to meet you. Don Baldwin? That's
You got a great future with a great company.
The House of Ford has been likened to a Byzantine court. It is said that Henry Ford hoards power and grows weary of lieutenants. 5 presidents have departed for various reasons during his reign. But there is no indication as yet that Henry Ford has grown weary of Lee Iacocca. Iacocca has many enemies, but even the worst of them admit that he can sell cars.
Well, there's 2 kinds of cars, those that sell and those that don't sell. Nothing happens till you sell something. And you can plan and analyze yourself to death and talk yourself to death, but you finally got to create action. You got to move.
And now.
And action! Hustle in there now. Nice and bouncy, a lot of fun. You're going off to a nice Sunday brunch, 17-mile drive, real happy, good riding car. Okay, hurry around. Nope, door's not closed. Cut it! Back to 1, please. We got a shadow. We got to go.
Testing 1, 2. 1, 2, 3.
The annual moment of truth has arrived. A nervous army prepares to unveil the new line.
Testing 1, 2. 1, 2, 3.
The 1977 Ford Showboat is launched, and the size of the party befits the occasion. For 50 years, the motor car has got bigger and bigger. Now, for the first time in history, they're making the motor cars smaller. There is a fundamental difference in strategy, however, between Ford and General Motors. GM has gone all the way, but Ford has kept his big cars big. If Ford is right, he will at last cut dramatically into GM's massive share of the market. But as a new Mark V rolls off into the marketplace, Henry Ford knows from bitter experience that all his monumental planning can bear bitter fruit. In 1959, this mistake cost Henry Ford $350 million. The only people who loved the Edsel were the stand-up comics.
We were going in the right direction, but we maybe went a little too far and at the wrong time.
Was this sort of the first real blow that you suffered? Did it come as a shock because things had been going
No, those you win a few and lose a few, and some get rained out. You know, you can't worry about them.
An equally famous and much more significant disaster belonged to General Motors before it was reduced to a salad bar in a restaurant. Ralph Nader informed the world that the Corvair was unsafe at any speed, and the consumer movement was born. One of your biographers was quite convinced that you would have a rich appreciation of Ralph Nader, and I think you were quoted as saying that you thought he was full of crap. Did you hold that opinion, or do you still?
Well, Ralph Nader is an upstart, and he made a success out of writing a book, which I'm not going to comment on whether it's right or wrong. I really don't know the facts. If I knew the facts, I'd make a comment, but I really don't know the facts. But, you know, he's had his day in the sun, and I think it's on the wane. And I think properly so, because I think he's accomplished whatever he feels he needed to accomplish, and I think the country's getting sensible again.
We're going down there tomorrow. Irv is going, I'm going. We're going to support Bob Hampson. Bob will be our senior officer present, and he'll speak to the issues of, highway safety, emissions, the role of government, government intervention in automotive affairs, and so forth. But it's going to be a fairly friendly audience, so I guess we don't expect too much trouble, right?
For this one, they're trying to attract a lot of people who aren't traditionally members of the highway lobby. They've asked community leaders, they've asked some environmentalists, some local decision makers. So it's more likely at this meeting that there will be some people who don't quite share our views.
The beautiful thing about the automobile industry and automobile repairs and the fraud and dishonesty and all the deception which is involved in the automobile industry is that it hits everybody. It's non-discriminating. It's an equal opportunity exploiter. You know, maybe it's cars in the future or...
Phil Edmonston is the voice of Canada's car consumers.
We know that it's cars in the past were in pretty bad shape. So then we're the ghost of Christmas past visiting Mr. Scrooge on Christmas present.
Unfortunately, Ford Motor Company is faced with an image gap. Our recent current products don't deserve the poor quality reputation that they have among a large portion of the buying public, at least not to the degree reflected in our research.
At world headquarters, known as the House of Glass, the Ford Motor Company racks its brain. A TV spokesman must be found. They settle on 5 possibilities. Walter Cronkite, Michael Landon, and Bart Starr turn them down.
So we are now negotiating with the agents of Bill Cosby and Dick Van Dyke. Both are good storytellers. Both have good believability, and both could add an element of humility to our advertising that we think is very, very important. I have every reason to believe that one of them will be our spokesman for this campaign, probably Van Dyke, because Cosby's price is pretty steep.
The Ford Motor Company door latch and hinge test. Testing is boring.
They listen to a man imitating Bill Cosby. They decide that money is no object. They will get the real Bill Cosby to stand up and try to convert the critics.
It's simple. We want to be your car company.
Sue. Sue. Or sue. Now, litigation is that you sue their pants off, if you can, before the small claims court, before the provincial court, before the superior court, and if you got to go to the Supreme Court, go there. But sue all the time, and that's what we've been doing. We put about maybe 200 or 300 cases in small claims court. And there's 84 small claims court across this province of Quebec, just here. And the 84 small claims courts means Ford's going to have to get 84 different guys to appear as defendants every other day.
Phil Edmonston makes his point. Ford of Canada decides to compensate the rusty Ford owners. It could cost the company several $1 million. But if these particular complaints seem legitimate to Mr. Ford, they do not alter his overall view of the consumer movement.
Completely irresponsible, some of it, not all of it, but I think some of it's completely irresponsible. It gets some publicity for the people that are out there trying to cause trouble. And if they want publicity, it's a great way to get it. And unfortunately, they've gotten a lot of members of the Congress and state legislatures and public officials of one kind or another all exercised about things, and therefore there's been a lot of public pressure brought to bear on the political side of our life, and the politicians have done something thinking this is a big group. I'm frankly not at all sure how big this group really is. We do some pretty dumb things, and maybe we lead the consumer astray in some of the advertising we do. I think some of it's pretty ridiculous, and I never understand why the marketing people even let the advertising agency get away with the kind of junk that they propose. But anyway, it gets out into the public domain, and the Federal Trade Commission or others think that we've deceived the consumer. Well, if we have, we're willing to say we have.
Now, please, ladies and gentlemen, please.
He wears a beard to a stockholders' meeting. He denies a resemblance to Santa Claus, but he does lend a paternalistic ear to his critics.
Will you make sure the microphone's down a little bit so Mrs. Davis can be heard more clearly?
Yes, sir. I don't think there's anything wrong. I think it's the audio system, Mr. Chairman. There's something wrong with it. One of your flunkies must have pushed a button that it's not up.
No, the only one that can push a button is me, and I can shut you off right here.
But, Mr. Chairman, just like I can speak from memory, I can also speak very well without microphones. You see, I have a memory even without my notes.
You've got a much better memory than I do.
Well, there you are. You can't have everything in life, Mr. Ford.
Among the things that stand between Henry Ford and happiness are the politicians and bureaucrats of Washington.
We have never up to this day, and that's 10 years, been able to make the Congress understand, and they've been out here and we've been down there continuously, that the gestation period of an automobile is a lot longer than they think it is.
Why are you dealing with just the new car? You know, if you want to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, and you say taxes are the way to go, fine. Why don't you put a road tax on for all the cars on the road? You know, if some guy's driving around in a car getting 12 miles a gallon, he's going to pay a couple $100 tax to put a sticker in the goddamn windshield. You know, I'll tell you why they won't do that. Because there are millions of people out there that own those cars, and they all got to vote. So they'll never do it. So they're going to try to twist the whole thing by having dealing just with us on new cars, cars yet to be designed and yet to be manufactured, and trying to solve the whole fuel economy equation with just the new cars that get added to the population of 100 million babies already out there. And that's what I think is so nutty.
They argue that they are reasonable men, doing their level best to obey reasonable laws.
Real nervous. You can have some social reformers having us all riding around in wheelbarrows before we're through.
To prove that they are men of good faith, the car companies invite the lawmakers into their most secret chambers.
We're working on window regulator handles, bucket seats, headliners, even drip moldings to take the weight out.
They claim that if Washington enacts all the laws proposed by their loud and insistent critics, the car companies will simply go broke.
This fall. And this is the start of a massive downsizing of our cars. You can see here without...
The Secretary of Transportation, Mr. Coleman, is small, black, and immensely powerful. In his presence, even Lee Iacocca of the House of Ford is prepared to fly the flag of truce and have lunch with General Motors.
Lee, good to see you. Sorry, I always forget about that. It's good.
No, you can shake hard now.
Can I? Hello, Lee.
I'll be down soon one of these days. Okay. How about
about Mr. Iacocca and me coming together, but that wouldn't be quite
They'll lock us up.
Hello, Lee.
They tell me I have statutory authority. If you sit in the same room with me and drink with me, you guys can conspire.
While the car companies claim that they are merely simple merchants trying to make an honest dollar, their critics claim that they can also be a dangerous political force with influence far beyond the United States.
GM and fascists work hand in hand. GM and fascists work hand in hand.
General Motors, already defending itself against charges of past collaboration with Nazi Germany, now stands accused of supporting the fascist regime in Chile by continuing to make cars in that malevolent dictatorship.
I think we ought to put this in perspective. You know, Chile is really not all that important in any context, but I think the church group has put us in a position, no matter which way we go, we're going to make some people unhappy.
We're concerned about workers' rights, and we're concerned about the fact that the dictatorship in Chile at the present time is eroding basic workers' rights to the point of investigatory torture and imprisonment and so on.
And how many shares does the United Church have?
The United Church holds 4,000 shares. It's not a large amount, but it's significant.
Microphone number 4.
Mr. Chairman, Reverend Leonard Harbour from St. Catharines, Canada, a proxy holder, wishes to address the meeting on this proposal.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Len Harbour. It is appropriate that, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time a Canadian institutional shareholder has appeared at the annual meeting of an American corporation. We believe that from those to whom much has been given, much will be expected.
The captains and kings of Detroit have good reason to be dispirited. A Gallup poll has shown that the car dealer, new or used, is the businessman Americans most distrust.
Is the automobile here to stay? It better be. Oh, yeah, it's here to stay for this century, no question about it. I mean, it's an automobile as we look at it and say it's 15,000 parts, but ask any teenager what it is.
Down through the generations, it has indeed been the American teenager who has best understood the deeper meanings of the motoring age. For they were the first to realize the possibilities of the rumble seat and to discover the irresistible mating call of the motoring horn. A cornerstone of American morality, the difficulty of finding a suitable place for misconduct had been forever blown away. Here at last was a private place that could be moved at will to quiet country lanes. Even the moon could be maneuvered into place, and with a little ingenuity and suppleness of limb, all things at last were possible. It is not surprising that all manner of man still marvels at these chariots of love.
You're getting it too shiny almost.
I think.
Yeah, look how it is.
Yeah, no, I gotta redo the whole thing, but I want to do, just do a little spot and check the luster in it. That's what I was, I would rather mess up a little spot, so I can always dull it down.
Although most teenagers now make love in bed, the role of the motor car in the sexual revolution of America is undiminished. It provides each male with his territory, and in the animal kingdom, it is the territory and not sex appeal that lures the female of the species.
It's a Chevy.
All the motorheads come to meet together. I don't know.
These guys are crazy. I don't know.
No. Oh boy, we got another live one.
So what do you think of our hot rods, man?
As a vehicle for self-advertisement, the motor car is not limited to the teenager. Nudie the tailor, who used to make G-strings for chorus girls, wants the world to know that he now makes cowboy clothes for dude ranches. This car was recently driven down Hollywood Boulevard to prove that, at least in California, it is now possible to go to town in a bathtub. The Bathmobile now revolves in a car museum built to enshrine the immortal concoctions of the greatest car customizer in all the world. In a nondescript garage in North Hollywood, George Barris makes dreams come true.
I can't believe these guys. Turkeys all over the place.
Esquire magazine thinks he looks like Picasso. Some call his style streamlined Baroque. Others say his work is a Dionysian extension of the ego.
It's all over, but touches no place.
His customers include Steve McQueen, Liberace, and Batman. Disciples from far-off Australia study at the master's side.
That's what I'm trying to teach you, Tulip. Not to do things like this here. You won't have that problem.
We sculpture, we create, and we give illusions of what we feel in our mind. Instead of doing it on canvas, we do it on automobiles. We do it in steel, we use plastic, fiberglass, whatever form that we're working with, and we create an artistic form on four wheels, which becomes a functional thing that you can use. Like, for example, when I designed and built the cars for Sonny and Cher, you just don't call Sonny and Cher's manager and say, well, they want a car. I go to Sonny and Cher's home. We socialize. I find out what they like as far as colors, materials, what their personality is, what they feel like about a car, because a car is the second part of a person's life.
Like all good religions, the car cult has many rituals.
Break your 1/4 for that Chevy lug. Got your ears on? Come on.
On Van Nuys Boulevard in Los Angeles, it is a spontaneous gathering each Wednesday night of some 10,000 perfect strangers.
No, we don't need no hams tonight. Action! Woo! Hello, Mama. Got it now. Oh, Frank, hang it up.
It's like part of me, you know. We were almost identical to each other. Like, I wasn't recognized either unless I had my car, you know. And then it came, like, you know, people would recognize me without my car. And a lot of people would call me by my name. And I didn't know them, you know. Well, I really had nothing going for me. You know, it hurt me a lot, you know, to think about, well, I got big teeth, you know, I got big ears. I lost all my self-consciousness. And I don't care if I got big teeth. At least I got my own teeth, you know. And then I said, I don't care if I got big ears. I can hear with them.
Mandy Pearson of Windsor, Ontario, makes $100 a week and spends 40 of it on gasoline. She drives her Mustang around for 8 hours a day and spends another couple of hours keeping it clean.
Like, if it was cold and all that, out, and it's got frost on it or anything, they'll write on it. Well, one guy last year left me a message telling me he loved me. Yeah, I tried to get it right out of the paint, but it wouldn't come out. I tried wax, compound, everything, it wouldn't come out. I can't even remember the guy's name now. Somebody ran into me once, backing out of a driveway. And I saw him coming and I couldn't do anything. I just beat my horn. I couldn't back up because there was somebody behind me. I felt so bad. You know, I felt like crying almost. And when they smashed my window, I did cry in the back of the cop car, you know, because it really, like, it hurt my car and it hurt me at the same time. Terrible.
In the middle of Detroit is a singular vision of the car culture. It fills 4 walls of the Great Hall of the Institute of Art. The mural deals with the assembly line as a mechanical masterpiece, a place where tourists are taken to watch the men at their marvelous work. But it was painted in the Depression days of 1932, and the Mexican artist Diego Rivera also saw the assembly line as a dark instrument of oppression. To feed the appetites of the motoring age, Henry Ford had begun to accelerate the speed of the line, and men who could not keep up the pace began to break apart. The murals were commissioned by Henry's tragic son Edsel, and perhaps it was his way of reminding future generations that if the forces his father had unleashed were left unchecked, they could play havoc with the dignity of the working man and the quality of life at large. The assembly line now moves at a humane speed and is automated to make the job even easier. The monotonous repetition still tears at the nerves of some workers, but Henry Ford II has established a good working relationship with organized labor. His policies have been enlightened and innovative, and he has pioneered in the creation of equal opportunity for the black worker. But despite the decent conditions, some men like Dudley Pearson, who came up from Mississippi 18 years ago, now want to go home.
Well, right now, I don't compare here with no ways of Mississippi because I have made quite a few visits back down there since I've been here, and it's been so much improvements and all. And right now, I'd rather be there than to be here for the living part. And if all the time we go down there, my children and all, they don't ever want to leave.
It is not the assembly line, however, that will drive Dudley Pearson back to Mississippi. It is the world outside. The center of the city that spawned the automotive age is a ruptured wasteland where you can buy a house for $50. The well-to-do have jumped in their motor cars and fled to the land of the suburb and the supermarket, taking their tax dollars with them. The awful vacuum that remains is filled with a poor, confused migrant population drawn to Detroit by the elusive promise of big money. Deserted and disillusioned, many of them turn to hard drugs and naked violence in a city now too poor to pay for a proper police force. Prowling the ruins of race riots and gang wars are the creatures of the inner city that have stabbed, strangled, and shot 1,700 private citizens to death in the past 2 years. And so Henry Ford's hometown became known as Murder City. The car companies began to realize that they must come to grips with the embarrassing ruin that lay around them.
Jacobson.
Oh, yeah.
He was going to try to get Jacobson's here, and we were fussing about the access. Well, the access he's talking about is from the parking lot that's going to get finished over there up into here. Now, this gets done last. There's a hell of a lot to do.
Henry Ford has led the bold movement to bring Detroit back to life. The bright towers of their Renaissance Center have been created as an economic and psychological beacon to draw man and business back into the inner core. Perhaps Henry Ford can help save Detroit, but what of the accusations that the motor car has disfigured the face of the earth in general? In order to accommodate the automobile, 65% of Los Angeles County is now under concrete. General Motors has been accused of buying up mass transit systems in many cities for the purpose of replacing them with even more of their motor cars. The American air is befouled by so much poisonous gas that school children have been asked not to exercise for fear of breathing too hard. Henry Ford could rightfully reply that automotive pollution has been cut by 80%, that he once advocated a hike in gas taxes to help the poor and the unemployed, and that the highway is not a creature of rampant capitalistic greed, but the only possible means of getting America to where it wants to go.
I don't know what the country would be like without the automobile. I can't imagine it. You know, this country really has been built within the last 75 years, whereas Europe was built hundreds of years ago, basically, the larger cities. And when people talk about mass transit, it always bothers me to think that we can do with mass transit what the people in Europe can do with mass transit, because we can't. Our whole society has been built on the automobile, whereas their cities and environment has all been built before the automobile. The automobile was an addition over there.
Any American, any Canadian, one of his real great assets that he has is the highway system that he can use for free. The highway system is worth $485 billion, and anybody can use it who has the key. And what is the key? The key is not a bicycle. The key has to be an automobile of some kind.
There have been attempts to reduce the number of cars on the road. In Los Angeles, they tried to limit one lane of a single freeway to cars with 3 or more passengers. This brought a cry of outrage from the motorist.
After all, a guy in his car alone paid just as much for his gasoline and just as much for the freeway as anybody else.
The fact that police were now peering into a man's motor car to count the number of heads was considered a breach of the American birthright and brought forth a demonstration of American ingenuity. As an engine of death, the motor car has no equal. In its short history, millions of North Americans have suffered ruptured spleens, crushed kidneys, shattered hip bones, punctured hearts, and snapped spinal cords. 2 million of them have died. By the 1990s, another million will be killed, bringing the 100-year total to 3 million, or roughly 4 times the number killed in all of America's wars combined. And yet the American motorist is not keen on restrictions. The airbag was patented in 1952, but hardly anybody uses it. Ford tried introducing seat belts in 1956, and everybody went out and bought a Chevrolet. The danger of driving a car has been compared to balancing in the parapet of a 12-story building in a high wind. And yet it's quite simple for a 16-year-old to get himself a driver's license.
You'll start a totally new life when you believe in Jesus Christ. Open your heart to him and receive him as your own Lord and your Savior. And I invite you to do that now in a closing prayer. Almighty God, in this congregation and across America.
Some years ago, Reverend Robert Schuller noticed that his church was empty and moved into a drive-in theater. The automobile, he discovered, was a popular place to contemplate the hereafter. He soon had the biggest drive-in church in the world.
And he did this. A person's guard is down in his car. Perhaps you've had the experience of knowing someone who is a stranger. You probably even had a tension between the two of you. Maybe there was competitiveness, maybe jealousy, there was a tension. Then on a certain occasion, the two of you had a ride together in the same car to go someplace. Strangely enough, by the time you reached your destination, you felt friendly with him. There's something about a car that, because of its smallness, I suspect, forces an intimacy that causes the man-made psychic barriers to be diminished, and suddenly we communicate. Smiling, loving, reaching, and their heart melts, and their soul is saved.
To some men, a place to meet with God. To others, an instrument of the devil. A simple machine that seems to defy description. But whatever it is, Henry Ford plans to keep on making it until such time as America decides on some other form of civilization.